Hi everyone. After a week off, so much for my intention to get it done every week, we're now back with part 2 of my series, Understanding Mindfulness Practice for the Intuitively Autistic. With the second video, I am your Ruth and you are my Topaz. So in this video, I'm going to try to answer some of the questions I asked at the end of part 1. So I better recap a little bit. I had previously tried doing a standing up meditation based on the proclamation of Ruth. And when I was doing that, I got a spontaneous visualization of a glowing yellow light spreading from inside my tummy. So I thought I'd try doing this when I was lying down in a state of feline paralysis. But instead of getting a glowing visualization, instead I got cartoon elephants. Maybe you should watch part 1 before you watch this one. This led me to ask a number of questions. Can I learn to do it, that is, the glowing light visualization, lying down? Why do people talk about a connection between type of practice and posture anyway? And what is a good being sat on by cat practice? And so these are the questions I'm going to start thinking about today. So starting from the last one, it occurred to me that maybe a with cat meditation should be about the cat. My cousin Claire had also watched the video, and she sent me a response that included the suggestion that I should look into the fact that cats purr at the frequency of the universe. Now, I don't think the source of this piece of information was the most reliable, and I must admit I had quite a bit of skepticism about this line of inquiry. But for you, Claire, here goes. My initial inquiries searching for per frequency of universe didn't actually turn up anything. But modifying it, I started looking for the hum of the universe, and that started coming up with a few things. One of the things I really recommend you look at is this video by John Kramer, which is on YouTube, where he's combined a visualization of the early universe with a soundtrack of what it would sound like if you converted the gravitational waves to audible sound. Now, one of the things that flashed up on this video was that in order to create the audible sounds, he multiplied the energy frequencies by 10 to the power of 26. That's a 1 followed by 26 zeros. So if that was the case, it's really, really, really not happening at the frequencies that we can hear. The video did tip me off that I was probably looking to find out information on the frequency of gravitational waves. And so I found this diagram on the Wikipedia page on gravitational waves. Now, probably the most useful thing to look at on this figure are these reference points I've circled here. So this tells you that on the left, we're talking about gravitational waves that have one wave in the entire age of the universe, compared to at the far right, we're talking about gravitational waves that's one wave every millisecond, so 100 per second. We're talking about a hugely, even unimaginably huge for the human brain, range of frequencies of gravitational waves. If we look at where cats' purrs fit on this chart, we can see this small range over here. Then the range of frequencies that humans can hear is that slightly larger range below it. So if we're going to look at the overlap of gravitational waves with the frequencies that humans hear, it does correspond pretty closely to cat's purrs, but still not completely. So there is maybe some basis for a claim that the frequencies of gravitational waves have more in common with cat's purrs than other sounds that humans can hear. The other way I looked at this question is from the opposite direction. What do we know about why cats make noises? Now, you may have heard a very common claim that cats, when they interact with each other, don't meow, which has led a number of people to propose that the correct translation of meow into human language is something like, "Oi, slave." However, this ignores the fact that kittens actually meow at their mums to get their attention, which suggests to me that the best way to translate meow into language is mom, which, when you think about it, is really oi slave with overtones of remember you love me. But I digress. The question was, why do cats purr? And with some quick Googling, I came up with this article, which is similar to a number of sort of similar science communication sources that I've read in the past. And it says, it's easy to assume that cats purr because they're happy. After all, when your kitty contentedly curls up in your lap for some well-deserved scratches and rubs, she's obviously one happy feline. However, cats also purr when they're frightened or feel threatened, such as during a visit to the vet. Well, I'll add on this one, not Topaz, but I assume that other cats might. They go on to suggest that it could be an appeasement gesture, similar to a sort of nervous or fake smile that humans might use, but the bottom line is we don't know. The article, like a number of similar ones I've seen, also goes on to talk about this theory that cats purr could also have healing properties. It seems that the frequency of cats purr is known to promote healing of bones, as well as the repair of muscles and tendons, ease breathing, and reduce pain and swelling. Now, I did try and look at the study, but I couldn't access it. It was a genuine published article. However, my suspicion is that the cat purr has healing properties theory is a lot more contested in the scientific community compared to the community of science communication authors looking to write entertaining articles about cats' purrs. I can, from my personal experience, say that my right armpit, which receives more purrs than any other area of my body, has never had any health issues that I've ever noticed. However, I must point out that neither has my left armpit, which never receives any purrs for some reason. What would be really helpful to test this theory is if Topaz would conveniently arrange himself around my head and purr on my brain to see if that speeds up the recovery from migraines and headaches. However, Topaz has so far proved extremely unwilling to help me test this hypothesis. And while interesting, none of this has really helped me with the problem I set out with, which was designing a with cat meditation. So I decided to go back to my original idea that the with cat meditation should be about the cat and think about my relationship with Topaz. Now, probably the most important thing about my relationship with Topaz is that in no way is it characterized as a relationship between owner and pet. Unless, I suppose, you think of me as the pet and Topaz as the owner. But I don't really like that. So, I've always tried to express it as Topaz is my cat and I am his human. And so I was thinking maybe this would be a good proclamation to use in the meditation. But then I thought about one of the meditation homework my GP sent me. Now, the story of how I have a GP who sends me meditation homework is a long story. I'll get to it probably at some point during these videos. But the point for now is that when she said this, I was like, eh? And still pretty much when I think about it, I'm like, eh. But I decided that I'd try it out in this context, and so instead of defining ourselves as cats and human, just to go with the individual statement, I am your Ruth, and you are my Topaz. So the next opportunity for a with cat meditation, which naturally Topaz had decided to position himself somewhere else, I tried this out. And spontaneously and automatically, I got a visualization involving glow-on lights. In this case, there was a yellow glowing light emanating from me, moving towards Topaz, but Topaz had a bright green glowing light that was coming from him and moving towards me. And then I started thinking about the story of Topaz and I and how we came to be together. So this is the first time I met Topaz. I'd gone to Sydney to visit my friends, and as I'd driven down there, I thought maybe as I had some time off, it'd be a good opportunity to look at cats, and then I could just drive them back with me to Canberra. So I saw a picture of Topaz on one of the adoption websites, and I just had a sense that he was probably the cat for me. So I went to visit him in the pound, and I just remember it was right next door to the dog pound, and there was this constant ongoing woofing. And then in the cat area, most of the cats were wandering free, and a number of cats were coming up to approach me. But then we got taken to Topaz, who was hidden right in the dark corner, not wanting to come out, completely terrified. And the impression I got was he wasn't just terrified of me, which was understandable as I was a new person he'd never met before, but that he was completely traumatized by the whole experience of being in this place. And I just knew I had to get him out there and take him somewhere with less woofing. So I promised him I'd do that, and then I went outside to talk through the adoption. And it turned out that you couldn't just take a cat on the day. They had a policy where they had to be neutered first. Topaz hadn't been neutered, and so I found myself agreeing to adopt the cat and organise for him to be flown to Canberra. A couple of days later, I picked up Topaz from the airport, brought him home. He got out of his cat box, ran and hid in my cupboard, and I never saw him again for 2 weeks. I knew he was still there because someone was eating the cat food I was leaving out. But apart from that, there wasn't much to show for this having a cat thing. But after 2 weeks, Topaz started to decide that maybe it wasn't necessary to wait until after I'd left the room to come out and start eating his dinner. Now, I've always felt a little bit guilty about my role in the Topaz origin story. About 9 months earlier, I'd got my first cat, Medwin, as a kitten, and this was something I'd been waiting for my entire life. He was spoilt with cat towels, with all the toys he could ever want, and probably many more besides. I had a little lead for him, and we'd go for a walk pretty much every day. Unfortunately, 6 months later, Medwin died. And by that stage, things were getting really difficult for me. It was the beginning of the anxiety, the trauma loops that were going to leave me off work and become the story of the next 5 years of my life. With Topaz, after I got over the initial grief of Medwin, I'd reached the point where I knew I just needed a cat. But I didn't have any of the emotional energy to go through this again. Topaz was the name he came with, not one I chose, and the toys were all Medwin's toys. There was very little I did that was specifically for Topaz. But then when I looked back over the period of time when I'd been at my sickest, there was this pattern where Topaz was no longer scared of me, but as soon as new people might come into the house, he would bolt back into his cupboard. And after a while, I would be exhausted from the people. And so I'd come upstairs and I'd tell Topaz that it was okay. They'd stay downstairs. And Topaz would poke his head out of the cupboard. And then he'd decide that instead of hiding alone in the cupboard, he'd rather curl up next to me. We had somehow found our little place together, curled up together on my bed, away from all the people and all the woofing dogs. and together we felt safe. And as I lay there trying to work out what this all meant, I also thought of Topaz, lying on his back enjoying the sunshine, and how in taking on this posture he was making himself completely vulnerable, and how he could only do that when he felt completely safe, and how much it showed that he trusted me, that he would be willing to do that when I was there. So it seems that the with cat meditation in a lying down posture is all about trust and safety, whereas the standing up I am Ruth meditation is all about strength. And so while I was in the lying down posture, I couldn't do a visualization that was associated with strength because the emotion wasn't correct. Now, about this time, I got a second video response, this one from my cousin JJ, and in amongst all the really interesting things she was saying, she included this diagram and how she was making the point that making plans to move your body, and she thought that maybe visualizing your body could be similar, is not just about the environment or specific things about the body. It also has a role in terms of intention, goals, and feelings. And she was making the case that for autism, a lot of these connections are more weak. And this makes a lot of sense to me, not just in terms of this meditation, but in general. I think that it's just really hard to get my brain to do something when it doesn't have the emotional dimension behind it. In this case, it was just impossible for me to do a visualization that represented strength when I was in a position that represented vulnerability. However, I could do a visualization that reflected some of the emotions associated with vulnerability, such as trust and safety. The other part of this was the role of the environment, and JJ didn't really explain how that came into it so well. Hint, hint, JJ. But one thing I noticed is that I tried doing this visualization again without a cat, because cats, for some reason, don't appear on demand when I want to do a meditation. And in that case, I couldn't do it. It seemed to me that without Topaz, I couldn't intuitively access that feeling of safety. But I could understand maybe what Topaz was feeling when he poked his head out from behind the cupboard and was thinking that maybe he would feel safer curled up next to me than hiding on his own. The other thing JJ told me about was the importance of cues in some of these processes. She used the example of people with strokes who needed to learn to walk again. And if you tried to break down walking into a series of steps, they just found it really complicated and couldn't do it. But if you just gave them a cue and told them to walk towards the X on the floor, somehow this made a huge difference, and it was much easier for them to do it. So JJ suggested I should think about maybe there was a cue I could use. So it seems like the cue for the with cat meditation is the cat. The next time I tried the with cat meditation, Topaz curled up in my armpit. He was purring. I was saying the proclamation, I am your Ruth and you are my Topaz. And I started off seeing the yellow and green lights merging, but then the vision changed, and suddenly I had a vision of all the stars in the universe humming in frequency with Topaz's purr. So maybe Claire and my GP were onto something after all. I like to finish these reflections with the questions I want to think about next time. But for this one, I realised that someone else had already asked them. Tell me one last thing, said Harry. Is this real, or has this been happening inside my head? Dumbledore beamed at him, and his voice sounded loud and strong in Harry's ears, even though the bright mist was descending again, obscuring his figure. Of course it is happening inside your head, Harry, but why on earth should that mean that it is not real? But while I said I wanted to end with questions, Topaz had other ideas, and we all know who yields the meows in this relationship.